Welcoming you to a life of awareness, the Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kersner.
Hello and welcome to episode 92 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now. And I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me in this unprecedented and beautiful present moment. The title and topic of today's podcast is understanding the difference between intention versus expectation in the present moment. This is a topic that is relevant to everyone because many of us are programmed, believe, and live with expectation. It is a key and integral component of societal programming. Expectation is a tool of the ego. It creates self-inflicted and unnecessary suffering. And I wanted to spend some time to illuminate the differences between intention and expectation so that you can take some time to see how you've been living with expectation and to understand the many benefits of switching over to embracing a more intentional way of being. There are many reasons that I chose this topic, and I know firsthand what it's like to live with expectation. The amount of suffering that I endured because I held expectation not only for others but for myself. This is a societal structure, a program. As you know, I talk about the matrix. It is a key component of the matrix because it creates suffering and it's a control mechanism. It's a strong tool of the ego that the ego uses against you and others. And it needs to stop, or at least we need to shine a light on it so we can see it for what it is and how insidious expectations are, because really they are impossible. Life does not ever live up to the expectations that we set forth. And when we fall short, then we suffer. When we have expectations of others and they don't live up to the expectations that we set forth for them, we suffer. And we might subsequently make them suffer. This is a relevant topic because right now there's a lot of people that have expectations that are unreasonable for society, for the future, for themselves. And it's not to say that you can't live with goals and strive and work towards things. But understanding the difference between expectation and intention is understanding the difference between experiencing self-inflicted suffering versus having the ability to pivot and shift in the present moment with ease. And that is a stark difference between the two. Now, it's not to say that you should have known any different up until this point. But once we sit together, which is what we're doing now, we're sharing present seconds, we're explaining the difference between having expectation and the many issues that arise with it versus shifting over to a more intentional way of being. When you have expectations, and they're usually set forth through the lens of the ego, very few things match up. And like I was just talking about, the expectations could be for a variety of different issues, challenges that exist, people, places, and things within your life, within your reality. And if you zoom out enough, you can see how all the expectations that you had on these things have caused you to suffer. Now, what I'm suggesting is that we can be more intentional with the things that we do, with the things that we want, because it allows for more breathing room. If you're intentional, if something doesn't work out the way that you had hoped, you have the ability to pivot and shift, to enter into that flow state, to maintain your momentum. But when you have an expectation, it's very static. And if Whatever that you had expected didn't happen, you get stuck. And once you get stuck, the ego comes forward and gets you looped into this negative stream of thoughts. And this happens over and over and over again. And I consider this self-inflicted suffering because it's not necessary. There's an analogy that I share with many of the patients that I talk to on this topic, and it's one I think about often. The example is when people travel. To me, I see that there's two types of people when they travel. There's people that travel with expectation, and there's people that are more intentional with their travel plans. Now, when we travel, whether it's by air, sea, it doesn't matter, there are things that arise. And the people who have expectation tend to get very frustrated when things don't work the way that they expected, when their plans get interrupted, when a plane is late, when their luggage doesn't arrive on time, when the hotel messes up the reservation, when the car rental place isn't prepared properly, whatever it is, and it shifts their whole plan that they had, their expectations for the way things should be. And they enter into a state of frustration, possibly anger. Their egos get fired up, and all is lost. Then you have another group of people who have the ability to be more intentional with the plans that they set and are able to pivot and shift if things don't work the way that they had intended. It creates, for the flow state, allows for a lot less suffering, and it's just an easier way to navigate life. The traveling example that I give is very clear because we've seen this happen so many times. You have to zoom out a little bit and reflect on which version you've been exhibiting. It doesn't matter up until this point because you probably never thought about it in this way. But now that we've talked about expectation versus intention, and I've given you a very clear example of how that looks, now you understand the difference between the two and the level of suffering that expectation creates versus it living more intentionally, which allows for the pivoting and the shifting and the flowing through challenges and adversity. That's really the benefit of being more intentional in your life, is that you don't get stuck when things come up. It is just an easier way. It allows for more presence. And clearly, as I've been talking about in this podcast, expectation is a presence obstruction. It's a clear tool of the ego. And the ego thrives with expectation because it knows that there's going to be a point where what you expected didn't come true, and you are going to get looped in and taken out of the present moment. So my suggestion is, going forward, to be the observer, to watch yourself when you enter into situations and to see if you're being more expectational or more intentional with the things around you, externally and internally. Because having expectations of yourself is just as challenging as having expectations of others, if not harder. So you also have to look at the way that you're talking to yourself, the way you feel about yourself, the way your ego is either dominating you or not, what your plans are, if you have goals, what your wishes are, and if expectation is woven within the fabric of any of these things as you move forward and make the most of your present moments and ultimately your present seconds. Now, if you are being expectational, you have the opportunity now to shift it to a more intentional way of being, a more intentional state of being, with a more intentional perspective. Because there are going to be many challenges that you're going to face, sometimes multiple ones at the same time. And you want to have the ability to be present, and you want to have the ability to shift and pivot as those challenges come up, so that you don't get stuck, you don't get frustrated, you don't get angry, you don't get disappointed, that you're able to stay in that beautiful flow state so that you can keep pivoting to get where it is that you need to be. And ultimately, right now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be in this present moment. And I feel very grateful to share these seconds, these present seconds with you, and share this knowledge with you that I live with, because I'm constantly scanning my ego and my thought process to see if I have expectations for people, places, and things. And if I do, I'm not hard on myself. I don't allow myself to be judgmental on myself. I'm able to examine what's going on, why it's going on, and then shift to a more neutral state of being, which uses intention. And I ask myself, what is going on here? Why is it going on? And if I feel like there's some kind of negative motivator, if I feel stuck, oftentimes I can see that there is some kind of expectation to how I thought that thing or that person or whatever it was should be. And I have to do my work in that moment to talk with myself, to calm myself down, to breathe, and to remind myself that having expectations of others or of myself is just setting me up for self-inflicted suffering that isn't necessary. So I hope that you found this podcast helpful. It definitely is a topic that is relevant in this day and age. I hope that the example that I gave you of traveling and how it affects different people in different ways was helpful. And as always, I wish you nothing but peace.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.